The rule had always been simple. Don't go into the basement. Not be careful down there. Not it's messy or it's unsafe. Just don't. Growing up, I never questioned it. Every family has weird rules. This was just ours. The basement door stayed locked. The key kept on my father's keyring, and whenever someone asked about it, the answer was always the same. Old stuff, nothing important. But the older I got, the more that answer stopped making sense. Because the basement wasn't treated like a storage space. It was treated like a secret. When relatives visited, my parents double-checked the lock. When repairmen came over, my mom hovered near the hallway like a guard. When I once joked about turning it into a game room as a teenager, my father snapped at me in a way I'd never heard before. "Drop it," he said. Sharp. Final. That was the first time I realized something was wrong. The second time was years later after my grandmother died. She was the only one who ever hinted that the house wasn't what it seemed. Near the end, when her memory came and went in waves, she'd sometimes grab my hand and say things that didn't fit with anything else. "You were so quiet back then," she once whispered. "They thought you wouldn't remember." I laughed it off at the time. I shouldn't have. After the funeral, my parents asked me to stay with them for a while. They said they needed help going through old things. My siblings couldn't make it, so it was just me. That's when the tension started. They watched me more closely than usual, asked where I was going, what I was doing, if I planned to go out. Felt less like concern and more like supervision. One evening, while my parents were out, I noticed something I'd never seen before. The basement door was unlocked. The key wasn't on the hook where it usually hung. My heart started pounding immediately. I stood there for a long time, hand hovering over the knob, telling myself not to be ridiculous. I was an adult. This was my childhood home. There was no reason a locked door should scare me, but it did. I opened it. The stairs were steep and narrow, the air colder than the rest of the house. The light switch at the top didn't work. I had to use my phone flashlight as I stepped down slowly, each creak of the wood sounding louder than it should have. The basement wasn't dusty. That surprised me. It was clean, organized, shelves lined with labeled boxes, filing cabinets, a desk in the corner with an old lamp and stacks of papers. This wasn't storage. This was an archive. I started opening boxes at random. Tax records, medical paperwork, old photographs. Then I found a box with my name on it. Not baby stuff, not report cards, legal documents. I felt dizzy as I pulled them out one by one. Custody agreements, court filings, letters between lawyers. My name appeared over and over again, always alongside dates from years before I could remember. There were photos too. Photos of me, but not in this house. Different walls, different furniture, different people standing just out of frame. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. None of this made sense. My parents had always told me I was born here, raised here, that nothing about our family was unusual. But the documents told a different story. They talked about a transfer, about temporary placement, about conditions that had to be met. I heard the front door open upstairs. Panic shot through me. I shoved the papers back into the box and closed it just as footsteps approached the basement door. The light clicked on. My father stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You weren't supposed to see that yet. Not what are you doing? Not why are you here?" Yet, that word echoed in my head. Yet meant this wasn't just history. It was something still unfinished. My mother appeared behind him, her face draining of color when she saw where I was standing. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked defeated. I asked them what it was, who those people in the photos were, why there were legal documents about me before I even had memories. They exchanged a look. The kind couples share when they've rehearsed a lie so many times they no longer need words. My father finally spoke. "This conversation was supposed to happen later," he said. When you were ready. I asked, ready for what? He took a deep breath. For the truth about why we really took you in. And in that moment, standing in a basement I wasn't meant to enter, I realized something terrifying. I hadn't stumbled onto an old secret. I'd stepped into the middle of one. And whatever they were about to tell me was big enough that my family had hidden it for my entire life. They didn't invite me upstairs. Instead, my father stepped aside and let me finish coming down the stairs, like pretending this was normal would somehow make it less catastrophic. My mother followed, closing the basement door behind her and locking it again, out of habit, not logic. We sat around the old desk. For the first time, I noticed 3 chairs. One of them had always been empty. My father rubbed his hands together the way he does when he's nervous. My mother stared at the floor like she was reading a script written into the concrete. I asked again, "What is this?" My father exhaled slowly. "You weren't adopted in the way you think." That sentence landed strangely. Not dramatic, not shocking, just wrong. I told him I already knew I was adopted. They told me that when I was a kid. Closed adoption. Nothing unusual. End of story. He nodded. That part is true, but not the whole truth. My mother finally looked up. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from holding it in too long. "You came to us because you had to," she said. "Not because we wanted another child." That hurt more than I expected. I asked what that meant. They explained slowly, like they were afraid if they spoke too fast, the whole thing would collapse. I wasn't placed with them through a typical agency. I wasn't matched or chosen. I was transferred from another family, a family they knew, a family they were connected to in a way they never explained to me. They told me my birth parents didn't disappear. They didn't abandon me. They didn't die. They were still alive. That was the first time my heart really started racing. I asked where they were. My father hesitated, then said, "Nearby." I asked why I'd never met them. My mother swallowed hard. Because that was part of the agreement. Agreement, that word again. I asked what kind of agreement would keep a child from knowing where they came from. They told me there were conditions attached to my placement. Conditions set by a court. Conditions meant to protect everyone involved. I asked protect from what? They didn't answer immediately. Instead, my father stood up and opened one of the filing cabinets. He pulled out a thin folder and placed it on the desk in front of me. Inside was a psychological evaluation. Mine, dated from when I was 4 years old. I barely recognized the name at the top. It was mine legally, but written in a way I'd never seen before. Different middle name, slightly different spelling. My mother explained that when I was little, I'd been through something traumatic, something no child should experience. I asked what. She said they weren't sure how much I remembered. I told her I remembered nothing before this house. Silence. My father finally said, "That was intentional." My stomach dropped. They told me that after whatever happened, professionals decided it was better if I didn't have access to my previous environment. That reminders could trigger memories. That distance was safer. Safer. I asked if they'd erased my memory. My mother shook her head quickly. "No, nothing like that. But they encouraged us not to talk about it. Not to keep photos. Not to mention names." I asked why the basement existed. My father answered quietly, "Because we were never supposed to forget. Only you were." That sentence made me feel sick. I asked who my birth parents were. My father closed his eyes before answering. "They're your aunt and uncle." The room tilted. I laughed once. A sharp, broken sound, because my brain couldn't process what that meant fast enough. He explained. My biological parents were my mother's sister and her husband. Something had gone wrong in that household. Something severe enough that a court intervened quietly, without public attention. I asked what they did. My mother started crying then. Silent tears. Years old. "They didn't hurt you," she said quickly. "Not physically, but it wasn't safe." I asked why no one went to jail. My father said it was complicated. Money, reputation, influence, the kind of complications that don't exist for most people. I asked why they kept the secret from me. He said because I was happy, because I was stable, because they were afraid that knowing would make me feel like my entire life was built on a lie. I asked if my siblings knew. My mother nodded. They'd known for years. They'd been told to protect me. That hurt more than anything else. All those moments growing up, the strange looks, the overprotection, the way conversations stopped when I entered the room, suddenly rearranged themselves into a pattern I couldn't ignore. I asked if my birth parents ever asked about me. My father said yes, often. I asked if they were allowed to see me. No, he said. That was non-negotiable. I asked if they still lived nearby. Another pause. Yes, that was when I felt something inside me harden. Because this wasn't just a secret. This was a cage. They hadn't just hidden my past. They'd built my entire life around keeping me away from it. I stood up, suddenly unable to breathe in that room anymore. I asked one final question. What exactly happened to me? My parents looked at each other, really looked, like this was the line they'd sworn never to cross. My father said, "If we tell you that, nothing stays buried." And for the first time, I realized the truth wasn't just painful. It was dangerous, because whatever happened to me as a child wasn't just a bad memory. It was something my entire family had agreed to protect, at all costs, and I was standing right on top of it, finally old enough to dig. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of nightmares, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped thinking. Every detail kept rearranging itself in my head, like my brain was desperately trying to build a version of my life that actually made sense. Childhood moments I'd never questioned suddenly felt staged, carefully managed, curated. I remembered how my parents never liked sleepovers, why certain relatives never visited, why family reunions always felt tense instead of warm. None of it had been random. I went back to the basement the next morning before anyone woke up. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened every box. I read everything. There were reports from therapists, notes from social workers, letters exchanged between lawyers that never used plain language, but hinted at enough to make my chest tighten. Emotional instability in the household, boundary violations, risk of long-term psychological harm. No graphic details, no clear villain, just enough ambiguity to keep everyone protected, except the child at the center of it. Me. I found photographs I'd never seen before, pictures of my biological parents holding me as a baby, smiling, normal, too normal. That was the most disturbing part. Nothing in those photos explained why I'd been removed, why an entire family had decided silence was safer than truth. When my parents woke up, I confronted them again. This time, I didn't ask questions. I made statements. "You didn't protect me," I said. "You protected yourselves." My mother broke down completely. She admitted they'd been terrified, not just of hurting me, but of what would happen if the truth ever surfaced. Their family's reputation mattered. Their relationships mattered. Keeping things quiet mattered. I asked if they'd ever planned to tell me. They said yes. Eventually. That word again. Eventually meant never unless something forced their hand. I asked if my biological parents had ever tried to contact me directly. My father hesitated, then admitted they had once. Years ago. A letter. He said they intercepted it. Read it. Decided I wasn't ready. I asked where it was. He didn't answer. I found it later, tucked into a sealed envelope inside the filing cabinet. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a plea. They wrote about missing me, about therapy, about regret, about wanting a chance not to be parents again but to be honest. They never denied wrongdoing. They just said silence had been the worst punishment of all. That's when I understood something that made my hands shake. Everyone in this story had chosen what was easiest for them, not what was healthiest for me. I left the house that afternoon, I didn't slam doors, didn't make threats. I just left. For weeks, I didn't speak to anyone in my family. I started therapy on my own, handed over the files, the reports, the letter. The therapist didn't push me to remember anything I couldn't. She said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the trauma isn't what happened. It's what everyone refused to name. Over time, fragments came back. Not scenes, not images, feelings, fear without context, confusion, the sense of being watched too closely. Nothing cinematic, just enough to know the decision to remove me hadn't been imagined. I eventually reached out to my biological parents on my terms. We met in a public place. They didn't touch me, didn't call me their child, didn't ask for forgiveness. They answered every question honestly. Some things I still wish I didn't know. Some things finally made sense. I didn't rebuild a relationship with them, but I reclaimed something more important: agency. As for my family, the one who raised me, things will never be the same. Trust doesn't recover when it's built on omission. I don't hate them, but I no longer protect their version of the story, because silence didn't save me. It just delayed the damage. If you've ever felt like your family hid something big from you, like your life was shaped by decisions you were never allowed to understand, stay here. Subscribe. These stories aren't just about secrets. They're about what happens when the truth finally stops waiting. The breakup didn't happen all at once. There was no argument, no screaming, no moment where one of us said the words out loud. It happened quietly over weeks, while I was still showing up every day believing we were fine. Looking back, the signs were obvious. At the time, I ignored them because ignoring felt safer than asking questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. She stopped calling me first. Not dramatically, just subtly enough that I started telling myself she was busy. Work stress, family stuff, normal life things. When I did call, she answered, but her voice sounded thinner, like part of her attention was always somewhere else. Conversations shortened. Good mornings turned into late replies. Long talks turned into, "I'm tired." Plans turned into, "We'll see." But whenever I asked if something was wrong, she smiled and said no. "You're overthinking," she told me. So I did what people in love do when they're scared of losing someone. I tried harder. I became more understanding, more patient. I stopped bringing things up that might start uncomfortable conversations. I told myself relationships go through phases, and this was just one of them. I didn't realize at the time that I was slowly being trained to accept less. She started spending more time alone, not in a suspicious way, just away. Long walks, extra errands, sitting quietly with her phone turned slightly away from me. When I sat next to her, she didn't move, but she didn't lean in either. That hurt more than rejection would have. One night, I asked if she still loved me. She didn't answer right away. That pause, not long, just long enough, planted something dark in my chest. "Of course I do," she said finally. "Why would you even ask that?" I apologized. I shouldn't have, because from that moment on, I started apologizing for feelings that were trying to protect me. The house felt different, not hostile, empty, like I was living next to someone who had already emotionally moved out but hadn't packed yet. She stopped talking about the future. No more casual next year comments. No more joking about where we'd live someday. When friends talked about weddings or kids, she went quiet. I noticed she'd started dressing differently when she went out alone. Not better, intentionally different. Like she was trying on a version of herself I wasn't meant to see. I asked her once if she was happy. She said, "I don't know." That was the most honest thing she'd said in months. Still, I stayed, because leaving felt dramatic, and I didn't want to be the one who gave up when things got hard. What I didn't understand was that she hadn't been struggling. She had been deciding. The night everything shifted, it was raining hard outside. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, TV on but ignored. She kept glancing at her phone, then putting it face down. I asked who she was talking to. She said, "Just a friend." I didn't push. I wish I had. Instead, I asked something smaller. Do you still want this? Us? She sighed. Not annoyed, not angry, just tired. I don't want to hurt you, she said. My stomach dropped. That sentence doesn't belong at the beginning of a conversation. It belongs at the end. She told me she felt stuck, that she loved me, but not the way she used to, that nothing was wrong. She just felt like something was missing. I asked if there was someone else. She said no. I believed her, not because I was sure, but because the alternative hurt too much. She asked if we could take some space. Not a breakup, just space. I agreed, because I thought space meant distance. I didn't realize it meant goodbye. That night, she slept facing the wall. I lay awake listening to the rain, wondering how someone could be inches away and already gone. In the morning, she kissed my cheek like it was a habit she hadn't broken yet. I'll text you later, she said. She did. Short messages. Polite, careful, nothing affectionate, nothing real. Days passed, then weeks. I started to feel like I was waiting for permission to move on, or confirmation that there was nothing left to wait for. Friends told me to prepare myself. I told them they didn't understand, but deep down I did, because when someone slowly removes themselves from your life, the pain isn't the ending, it's the pretending. And as I sat alone in a house that still smelled like her, staring at a phone that barely buzzed anymore, I realized something terrifying. The breakup had already happened. I was just the last one to find out. The space she asked for didn't feel like space. It felt like suspension, like my life had been paused while hers kept moving forward. At first, I tried to treat it casually. I told myself this was healthy, mature, that people who loved each other could step back without falling apart. I filled my days with work, errands, distractions that kept me busy enough not to stare at my phone every 5 minutes. But nights were different. Nights were quiet in a way that made thoughts louder. I replayed conversations I'd brushed off.
Moments primers de dismissa.
I wondered how long she'd been pulling away while I was still leaning in. She texted every couple of days. Nothing deep, nothing emotional. How was your day? Hope work wasn't too stressful. The kind of messages you send to someone you don't want to lose, but also don't want to keep close. I answered quickly every time. Too quickly. I hated myself for that. One evening, she called unexpectedly. Hearing her voice again hit me harder than I was prepared for. For a few minutes, things almost felt normal. We talked about random things. A show she was watching, something funny that happened at work. Then there was a pause. I've been thinking a lot, she said. My heart started racing. I stayed quiet, afraid that if I spoke, I'd interrupt whatever truth was finally about to surface. She said she felt guilty, that she hated how distant she'd been, that she knew this wasn't fair to me. I asked what she wanted. She didn't answer directly. She said she needed time to figure herself out, that she didn't want to make promises she couldn't keep. I asked if she missed me. Another pause. I care about you, she said. That wasn't the answer I needed. After the call, I sat in the dark for a long time. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. I started to understand that this wasn't uncertainty. It was hesitation, and hesitation in love is rarely temporary. I noticed changes in myself. I stopped sleeping well. I reread old messages looking for reassurance that no longer existed. I caught myself checking her social media, scanning photos for clues about a life that no longer included me. She looked lighter, smiling more, going out more, living. And every time I saw that, a quiet fear grew inside me. What if I was the only one hurting? What if she'd already let go and just hadn't told me yet? A week later, I ran into her by accident. We both froze when we saw each other. She looked good, different, confident in a way I hadn't seen in months. We hugged awkwardly, brief, careful, like strangers pretending to be familiar. She suggested grabbing coffee. I agreed even though my instincts screamed no. Sitting across from her felt surreal. The conversation stayed shallow, safe, almost polite. She talked about new routines, new plans, things she was exploring. She didn't ask much about me. At one point, she reached across the table and touched my hand. The gesture was gentle, but it felt misplaced, like she was reaching for comfort, not connection. I asked her if she knew where this was going. She sighed. "I don't want to hurt you," she said again. That sentence returned like a ghost. I told her she already had. She looked genuinely sad, apologetic, but not desperate. That hurt the most, because people fight for things they're afraid to lose. She wasn't fighting. When we said goodbye, she hugged me longer than necessary. Then she walked away without looking back. I sat there long after she was gone, staring at the empty chair across from me, realizing something I'd been avoiding. This wasn't a breakup where someone leaves suddenly. This was a breakup where one person slowly prepares to go, while the other is left trying to catch up. That night, I didn't text her. For the first time, I didn't reach out. The silence felt heavy, but also honest. Days passed without contact, and in that quiet, I began to feel something unexpected beneath the sadness. Clarity. I started to see that love shouldn't feel like waiting for permission to be wanted. That holding on shouldn't require shrinking yourself. And that maybe the most painful part of all of this wasn't losing her. It was realizing how long I'd been losing myself trying to keep her. I didn't know yet how this would end, but I knew something had already changed. Because once you stop begging for scraps of affection, you can't go back to pretending they were enough. The silence stretched longer than I expected. At first, it felt unbearable, like something was wrong simply because nothing was happening. I kept waiting for a message, a sign, anything that would tell me I hadn't imagined the closeness we once had. But days passed, then more, and slowly the ache changed shape. It stopped being sharp and became dull, a constant presence instead of a fresh wound. I realized how much of my emotional energy had been spent waiting for replies, waiting for reassurance, waiting for her to decide whether I was still worth choosing. Without that waiting, there was space. Uncomfortable space, but space nonetheless. I started noticing things I'd ignored for months. How quiet my apartment really was. How often I'd avoided my own friends to be available for her. How my happiness had slowly been tied to her moods instead of my own life. One evening, I found an old photo of us by accident. We were laughing, real laughter, unforced. For a moment, grief hit me all over again. Then something unexpected followed. Acceptance. Not because the pain was gone, but because the truth had finally settled. She hadn't left suddenly. She had been leaving in pieces for a long time, and I had felt every piece detach. I just didn't want to name it. A week later, she reached out. "I've been thinking about you," the message read. My heart didn't jump this time. I stared at the screen for a long moment, noticing how calm I felt. Not hopeful, not angry, just steady. I asked what she wanted. She said she missed me, that she felt guilty, that she didn't like how things ended. I told her gently that things hadn't ended yet. They'd faded. She asked if we could talk. We met one last time. There were no tears this time. No tensión. Just two people sitting with the truth between them. She admitted she'd known for months that she couldn't give me what I needed, that she'd been afraid to say it out loud because she didn't want to be the bad person in the story. I told her she wasn't bad, just honest too late. She apologized sincerely this time, and for the first time I believed her. But belief didn't mean reconciliation. When we said goodbye, it felt final, not dramatic, not devastating, just real. I walked away knowing I hadn't been abandoned. I'd been outgrown, and maybe in some quiet way I'd outgrown her too. Healing wasn't linear after that. Some days were heavy. Some memories still caught me off guard. But I wasn't bargaining with the past anymore. I started rebuilding things I'd neglected. Friendships, hobbies, sleep. Most importantly, I rebuilt my sense of self, the part that had slowly bent itself to fit someone else's uncertainty. I learned something I wish I'd known earlier. Love shouldn't make you feel optional. Affection shouldn't feel conditional. And if someone needs distance to figure out whether they want you, the answer is already there. I don't hate her. I don't regret loving her. But I'm grateful the ending came quietly, before resentment turned into something uglier. Because some breakups don't explode. They dissolve. And recognizing that, accepting it, is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. If the story felt familiar, if you've ever stayed too long in something that was slowly letting you go, subscribe and stay. You're not alone, and the next chapter is always closer than it feels.